Okay, let's just jump right in. Imagine you have a country where the top two leaders, the head of the government and the head of the national church, both say they were put there directly by God.
And they just cannot agree on who actually gets the final say on, well, anything important.
That's pretty much the reality of Europe in the 11th century.
It really was. This tension was the defining feature of the Middle Ages. You had the Pope, Gregory VII, leading the Catholic Church, and then you had the Holy Roman Emperor, King Henry IV.
And these two powers, the spiritual and the worldly, were about to have a massive, very public fight over one question.
Who controls the people who control the land?
Exactly. And that fight became one of the biggest showdowns in European history. We're going to get into this medieval power struggle, and it all centers on something called lay investiture.
Lay investiture. It sounds a bit technical, but it was basically a custom that let kings and nobles appoint their own bishops and abbots.
So the local ruler, the layman, gets to pick the local religious leader.
Yes. And it was a huge deal for the king. It wasn't just a job offer. The king would physically give the new bishop the symbols of his office, the staff, and the ring.
Wait, so the king, who's not a priest or anything, is handing over these super important religious objects.
Precisely. The ring was for the bishop's commitment to the church, the staff was for his authority over his flock, and for a layman like King Henry to be part of that sacred ceremony.
The church reformers must have hated that.
Oh, they saw it as a total violation. But for Henry, it was just good politics. It was a tool of government.
And we have to remember, bishops back then weren't just religious figures. They were incredibly powerful.
They were. They were massive landowners. They had their own soldiers. They collected taxes. They were basically feudal lords.
So if you're Henry, you'd want to appoint your cousin or some guy who's loyal to you to be a bishop.
Of course. You get a key ally in a powerful position. It gave him political and financial control at a time when local nobles were always, plotting against him. If he lost the power to choose bishops, he'd have a much harder time ruling.
But the church saw this as the source of all corruption.
Right. They thought rulers were just picking political friends or whoever paid the most money, not the most spiritual person for the job. So when Pope Gregory VII came to power, he decided to end it.
And he didn't ease into it, did he?
Not at all. Gregory was not a man for compromise. He just banned lay investiture completely. He sent out a decree saying any ruler who tried it would be kicked out of the church.
Excommunicated.
Excommunicated. And any church official who accepted the job from a king was out too. This was a direct challenge to Henry, who had just appointed a few of his own guys.
And Gregory's vision went way beyond just appointments. He had this really radical idea about what the Pope's job was.
He did. He believed the Pope had supreme authority over all Christians, and that included kings. If a king was behaving badly, morally, the Pope had the right and the duty to step in.
To really get how big a deal this was, you have to look at this document he put out, the Dictatus Papae.
Right. The sayings of the Pope. It was a list of 27 statements about papal power, and they were bold.
So this wasn't just a political squabble. This was a whole new rule book for Europe. What were some of these claims?
Well, one said that only the Pope could use the imperial insignia, the symbols of the emperor. Another said the Pope could be judged by no one. But the biggest one, the one aimed right at Henry,
Let me guess.
was that the Pope had the power to depose emperors.
To fire the
To fire the emperor. Up until then, everyone believed a king's power came directly from God. Gregory was saying, no, it comes through the church, and the Pope can take it away.
So the king is really just a powerful employee of the church.
That was the argument. The needs of the soul, which the Pope managed, were more important than the needs of the government, which the king managed. So spiritual power was superior.
Henry IV must have lost his mind.
He was furious. He felt this power-hungry monk was trying to steal his God-given authority. So in 1076, he calls his own meeting with German bishops in the city of Worms to strike back.
And what's his move?
He gets his loyal bishops to declare that they no longer recognize Gregory as pope. They write this incredibly harsh letter calling him a false monk and demand that he step down.
So Henry is trying to fire the Pope.
Basically, yes. He's claiming his authority from God gives him the right to do it.
So now it's all out in the open. But the Pope, he has the ultimate weapon in this fight, right?
He does. Gregory immediately responds by excommunicating Henry.
And we should be clear, today that might not sound like a huge deal. But back then,
It was terrifying. You were officially kicked out of the Christian community. For a king whose entire authority rested on being a Christian ruler chosen by God, it was a catastrophe. Your soul was seen as doomed.
But the political effects were even more immediate, right? I mean, the chaos it caused.
Oh, absolutely. A kingdom like Henry's was held together by oaths. Oaths of loyalty from his dukes, his soldiers, everyone.
And excommunication just erased them.
It completely dissolved them. The Pope's decree freed every single one of Henry's subjects from their promise to obey him. It was like the Pope had shut down Henry's entire government with a single announcement.
Henry is suddenly all alone.
And the German princes, who were always looking for an excuse to get more power, saw their chance. They used it as the perfect moral cover to rebel.
So what did they do?
They met and gave Henry an ultimatum. You have 1 year to get right with the Pope and have the excommunication lifted. If you don't, we're picking a new king.
He's completely trapped.
Totally boxed in. He knows he has to stop the Pope, who is planning on coming to Germany to meet with those same princes. If that happened, he'd be finished.
So he makes this incredibly desperate move.
He does. In December 1076, in what was apparently one of the coldest winters ever recorded, Henry, his wife, their young son, and a few servants start this crazy journey across the Alps into Italy.
This isn't an army marching. This is like a pilgrimage born out of panic.
Absolutely. The mountain passes were frozen solid, buried in snow. It was incredibly dangerous. It just shows how desperate he was. He had to sneak past his own princes who controlled the main roads.
And he finally gets to Italy and finds the Pope.
He finds him at the castle of Canossa. And this isn't some quiet monastery. Canossa was a massive fortified fortress high on a hill. It belonged to a woman named Matilda of Tuscany.
And she was a big deal. A major power broker and a huge supporter of Pope Gregory.
A fierce supporter. Gregory was there because he was actually afraid Henry was coming with an army to capture him. So Matilda kind of acted as the mediator between them.
And when Henry gets to the gates, he doesn't show up like a king.
No, he shows up as a sinner, begging for forgiveness. He knows he needs to put on a show, a huge public display of humility.
This is the really famous part of the story.
It is. He takes off his royal clothes, his furs, everything. He puts on a simple rough wool tunic, like a common peasant doing penance. And then, for 3 straight days,
He just stands there, outside the gate.
he stands barefoot in the snow, fasting, praying, for 3 days in the freezing cold.
That is just an unbelievable image. The most powerful man, you're begging like that.
It was pure political theater, but it was incredibly effective. It showed the whole world, and especially those German princes, that even the emperor had to bow to the Pope's spiritual authority.
Gregory must have felt pretty powerful, but he was also in a tough position.
A very tough position. As a priest, Christian teaching says you can't refuse forgiveness to someone who seems truly sorry. People inside the castle were pressuring him to let Henry in. If he didn't, he'd look like the merciless one.
So on the 4th day, he gives in.
The gates are opened, Henry comes in, kneels, kisses the Pope's feet, and the excommunication is lifted. He's back in the church.
But, and this is a huge, but Gregory played it very cleverly.
Very cleverly. He forgave Henry the sinner, but he did not restore Henry the emperor to full power. He made Henry promise to let the German princes decide his fate. So Gregory proved his point. He forced the emperor to his knees.
It's a massive symbolic win for the Pope. But did it actually, end the fight?
Not even close. In practical terms, it just started the next phase.
So Henry gets forgiven and immediately goes back to being Henry.
Very much. He immediately starts trying to get his power back and go after the rebels. The German princes were furious that the Pope had forgiven him, so they just elected a rival king anyway.
And that led to a civil war.
A long and brutal civil war in Germany. Eventually, Henry got strong enough to march his army all the way to Rome, force Gregory into exile, and set up his own, hand-picked replacement pope.
Wow. So the fight just kept going. When did they finally sort it out?
Not until 1122, with an agreement called the Concordat of Worms.
And what did that agreement say?
It was a compromise. Kings could no longer give bishops the ring and staff those spiritual symbols. That was now a job only for the church.
But the king still got some say.
Yes. The emperor was allowed to be there for the election, and, crucially, he could give the bishop their feudal lands and powers, the stuff that made them a political lord. So the bishop now answered to the pope on spiritual matters and the emperor on worldly ones.
Which is a huge deal. The whole event at Canossa really cemented the idea that the church and the state are separate things with separate spheres of authority.
It's a defining idea for Western civilization, that dual authority. And, the event has really stuck in our culture.
Right, people still use the phrase going to Canossa.
It means having to make a really humiliating public apology or surrender. It all comes back to Henry standing barefoot in the snow.
The story of Henry and Gregory really shows how power and religion were completely tangled up in the Middle Ages, and how those fights shaped the way we think about government today. It leaves you with a really interesting question. If you were Henry, forced to do that to save your throne, would you see it as just a clever political move or as a true permanent defeat?
Something to think about, connecting that medieval moment to our modern world.
See you next time.